The message arrived during what should have been a routine council session. 7 species had gathered in the Grand Chamber, discussing trade routes and resource allocation, when every screen in the room suddenly went dark. Then came the screams. The footage showed a colony world dying. Millions of creatures, dark insect-like things with too many limbs, swarmed across cities that had stood for thousands of years. Buildings fell, ships exploded in orbit, and everywhere the people ran, trying to escape something that moved faster than fear itself. Ambassador Toral felt his 3 hearts hammering as the recording ended. Around him, the other council members sat in stunned silence. They had maintained peace for over 4,000 years through careful negotiation and economic pressure. War was something they studied in ancient history texts, not something that happened to civilized species. "How many worlds have fallen?" someone asked. 17, came the reply. In just 2 months. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. The Ravagers, that's what the initial reports called them, consumed everything. They didn't negotiate. They didn't respond to diplomatic overtures. They simply arrived, killed, and moved on to the next world. "Our defense fleets?" Toral asked, though he already knew the answer. "Ineffective. Our weapons were designed to disable ships, not destroy them. The Ravagers don't care about disabled vessels. They board them and kill everyone inside." More silence. The Council had built its entire military doctrine around the idea that no civilized species would actually want to kill. Deterrence, they believed, was enough. Now they were paying for that assumption with entire worlds. "We need options," said Chancellor Oren, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "There must be some weapon, some technology we haven't considered." "There is one possibility," said Nira, the Lumineth scholar who served as the Council's chief researcher. She moved to the central display and brought up a file marked with red warning symbols, "But you're not going to like it." The screen showed a blue and green world, beautiful despite the angry red text declaring it a Class 12 death world. Quarantine warnings covered the image. "Earth?" Oren said, disgust clear in his voice. "You want to contact the humans?" "I want us to survive," Nira replied. "And humans are the only species in the known galaxy with recent extensive military experience." Toral had read the reports on humanity. They came from a world so hostile that natural selection had turned them into something the Council could barely comprehend. Predators that hunted by simply refusing to stop chasing their prey. Pack animals that formed emotional bonds so strong they would die for each other. And worst of all, they seemed to actually enjoy the thrill of danger. "They're barely civilized," Oren protested. "Their own history is nothing but warfare. Empire after empire, each one built on the corpses of the last." "Exactly," Nira said quietly. "They know how to fight. We don't." The debate raged for hours, but in the end, desperation won. 3 more worlds fell while they argued. The Council simply had no other choice. That's how Toral found himself approaching the human orbital station a week later, trying to ignore how his stomachs churned with anxiety. The station itself looked aggressive, all sharp angles and weapon ports. Even their architecture seemed designed to intimidate. 2 humans met him in the docking bay. Commander Rachel Stone was tall and lean, with hair the color of dark metal pulled back from her face. General David Wu was shorter but somehow more intimidating, with eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. Both wore uniforms covered in patches and symbols Toral didn't understand. "Ambassador," Stone said, extending her hand in the human greeting. Toral forced himself to take it, trying not to think about how easily those fingers could crush bone. "Thank you for coming personally." "We need help," Toral said, deciding that directness was the best approach. "Our worlds are being destroyed and we have no way to stop it." Wu nodded slowly. "We've reviewed the intelligence you sent ahead. These Ravagers are a serious threat. Can you help us?" Toral heard the desperation in his own voice and hated it. Stone and Wu exchanged a look, something passing between them that Toral couldn't read. Then Stone pulled up a holographic display and gestured for him to sit. "Let us show you what we're dealing with," she said. For the next 2 hours, Toral watched as the humans dissected every piece of information about the Ravagers. They asked questions the Council had never considered. How fast could the creatures move? What was their communication method? Did they have a command structure? What were their weapons made of? Finally, Wu leaned back and crossed his arms. "We can help you, but we do this our way, with our tactics and our command structure. Your people will need to trust us even when what we do seems wrong to you." "Will it work?" Toral asked, Stone's smile was sharp and cold. Ambassador, humans have been fighting each other for our entire history. We've gotten very, very good at it. The Ravagers are about to learn what happens when you threaten a Deathworlders pack. 3 days later, the first human ships began arriving at Ilos Prime, the most recent world under attack. Toril watched them come, massive vessels bristling with weapons, carrying soldiers who had volunteered to fight and die for species they had never met. He wondered if the Council had just saved themselves or doomed the galaxy to a different kind of nightmare. Only time would tell. Nira had studied 17 different species across her career as a xenobiologist, but nothing prepared her for humans in their natural element. She arrived on Ilos Prime expecting soldiers. What she found were controlled predators preparing to hunt. The human base looked nothing like Council military installations. Where Council forces maintained clean, organized facilities focused on logistics and communication, the humans had built something that felt alive with barely contained violence. Weapons were everywhere, stacked in orderly rows but always within reach. Soldiers ran through obstacle courses, shouting at each other in harsh voices. Music blared from speakers, aggressive sounds with pounding rhythms that made Nira's sensory organs. "Hey, they're singing about death," her translator whispered in her ear as she passed a group of Marines preparing their equipment. The humans were laughing, making jokes about things that should terrify any rational being. One soldier cleaned his weapon while humming a tune about going home in a box. Sergeant Paul Grant noticed her watching and walked over. He was broad-shouldered and heavily muscled, with scars visible on his arms and a face that showed he'd seen combat before. To Nira, he looked like violence given form. "Can I help you, ma'am?" he asked. His tone was respectful, but Nira could see the barely concealed readiness in how he held himself. Even standing still, humans looked like they were about to spring into motion. "I'm observing," Nira managed, "for the Council's records." Grant nodded and went back to his squad. Nira watched as they checked their equipment with practiced efficiency. What disturbed her most was how they talked. They joked about previous battles, about friends who had died, about the odds of surviving the next engagement. They spoke of death like it was an old acquaintance rather than something to be feared. One Marine noticed her horrified expression. "Don't worry," he said with a grin. "Gallows humor keeps us sane." "Sane?" Nira thought. "You're preparing to die and you're laughing about it. How is that sane?" The answer came 3 days later, when the Ravagers attacked an evacuation convoy heading away from the northern settlements. Nira was in the command center when the distress call came through. Thousands of civilians, mostly elderly and children, trapped on a road with Ravagers closing in from both sides. The Council commander looked at the tactical display and shook his head. "We can't reach them in time. The logical choice is to—" "We're moving," Grant interrupted, already signaling his squad. "All units, civilian convoy under attack. We're going in." "Sergeant, the odds—" "Don't care about odds," Grant said, checking his rifle. "That's what we're here for." Nira followed in an observation transport, staying far enough back to be safe but close enough to see. What she witnessed changed everything she thought she knew about Deathworlders. Grant's Marines hit the Ravagers from an unexpected angle, their vehicles moving faster than should be safe on the rough terrain. They didn't ease into combat, they crashed into it like a wave hitting rocks. Weapons fire lit up the evening sky. Humans shouted coordinates and targets to each other, their movements coordinated through what looked like chaos to Nira's trained eye. But it wasn't chaos. It was a pack hunting together, each member knowing instinctively where the others would be, what they would do. Grant moved through the battlefield like he owned it, directing fire, pulling civilians to safety, and shooting Ravagers that got too close. When his rifle ran empty, he didn't retreat. He drew a blade and kept fighting. One of his Marines went down, hit by Ravager fire. Instead of leaving him, 2 others immediately moved to provide cover while a medic dragged the wounded soldier to safety. They exposed themselves to enemy fire to save one person. Nira couldn't understand it. The tactical computer said it was irrational, that the risk outweighed the benefit. But the humans didn't hesitate. The battle lasted 6 hours. By the end, Grant's squad had taken significant casualties, 4 dead, 7 wounded. But the civilians were safe. All of them. Not one had been left behind. Nira approached Grant as medics worked on his troops. He had blood on his uniform and a burn across his left arm that he seemed to be ignoring. Why did you do that? She asked. The tactical analysis said the position was untenable. Grant looked at her like she'd asked why water was wet. They needed help. But the risk doesn't matter, he interrupted, then softened his tone. Look, I know how council species think. You calculate odds and make logical decisions. That's fine for most situations. But sometimes logic says to give up, and that's when humans dig in. Those civilians needed us, so we went. That's the job, even if it means dying. Grant was quiet for a moment, watching his medics load wounded Marines onto transports. Especially then. You know what makes humans dangerous? It's not that we're stronger or faster than other species. It's that we decided a long time ago that some things are worth dying for. Family, friends, people who can't protect themselves. Once we decide something matters, we don't quit. We can't, it's not in us. Over the following weeks, Nira watched this pattern repeat across the war zone. Humans held positions they should have abandoned. They carried wounded when retreat would be faster without them. They volunteered for missions with low survival odds, and they did it all while maintaining that strange combination of grim humor and absolute determination. The council soldiers noticed too. At first they were horrified by human methods, but slowly something changed. A young council officer named Finn started training with human Marines, learning their tactics. Others followed. They began to understand that what looked like madness was actually a different kind of logic, one based on loyalty and sacrifice rather than pure calculation. Finn came to Nira after a joint operation where a human soldier had shielded him from an explosion, taking wounds that should have been Finn's. They don't fight to win, he said, his voice full of wonder. They fight until nothing can make them stop. That's why they're winning. The Ravagers fight until it's not efficient anymore. Humans fight until they're dead, and sometimes even that's not enough to stop them. Nira began writing her report to the council, but she struggled with how to explain what she'd seen. The humans weren't just soldiers. They were survivors of a world that had tried to kill them for millions of years. Every instinct, every behavior was shaped by that crucible. They bonded fiercely because cooperation was how their ancestors survived. They fought ruthlessly because hesitation meant death. They sacrificed themselves because protecting the pack was more important than individual survival. She finally understood why humans had been quarantined. It wasn't because they were evil. It was because they were terrifying in their intensity. They approached everything, war, friendship, loyalty, with an all-consuming passion that gentler species couldn't comprehend. And now that passion was pointed at the Ravagers. For the first time since the invasion began, Nira felt something she hadn't expected: hope. The Ravagers learned fast. After their initial losses to human forces, they adapted their tactics, sending larger swarms in coordinated attacks. What worked against council forces now failed against humans, so they changed. Evolution in real time, driven by a hive intelligence that never made the same mistake twice. General Wu watched the tactical displays in the command center as reports flooded in from 3 different worlds. The Ravagers were testing human defenses, probing for weaknesses. They'd stopped their random attacks and started thinking strategically. They're getting smarter, Commander Stone said, studying the patterns. Or more desperate. Both, Wu replied. He pulled up a galaxy map showing red markers for Ravager-controlled territory. It had grown significantly in the past month, despite human intervention. We're winning battles, but not fast enough. At this rate, they'll overwhelm us through sheer numbers. Stone knew what he was thinking. They needed to commit more forces, bring Earth's full military capability to bear. But that meant revealing just how dangerous humans could be when fully mobilized. The council chamber erupted in argument when Wu presented his request for additional forces. Chancellor Oren stood with 3 of his tentacles raised in distress. You want to bring how many ships? How many soldiers? That's more firepower than the entire council fleet combined. It's what we need to win, Wu said flatly. Or to conquer us once the Ravagers are defeated, Oren shot back. Toril intervened before the situation escalated. We asked for help. We're getting it. Either we trust the humans or we don't. 3 days later, human ships began arriving in numbers that made council observers nervous. Battle carriers as large as stations, destroyers bristling with weapons, and most unsettling of all, small fighter craft that moved with impossible agility. Captain Lisa Rodriguez flew one of those fighters. She'd been a test pilot before the war, pushing experimental craft to their limits. Now she led a squadron of 12 against Ravager forces that numbered in the thousands. Her ship screamed through space at speeds that would turn most Council pilots into paste against their seats. Humans could withstand 9 times their own body weight in acceleration, a trait evolved from millions of years of running from predators and chasing prey across varied terrain. That meant Rodriguez could make turns that seemed to violate physics, cutting inside enemy firing solutions and appearing where no rational pilot would dare to go. Her squadron hit a Ravager formation like a knife through flesh. Missiles streaked out, followed by cannon fire that tore through organic armor. When a Council observer asked how she could fight in such conditions, Rodriguez just laughed. This is nothing. You should try flying through a thunderstorm at night with engine failure. That's exciting. But fighter craft were just one element of what humans called combined arms warfare. Council forces had always kept their military branches separate. Naval forces fought in space. Ground troops secured planets, and never did the two coordinate closely. Humans treated war as a single organism with multiple limbs, each supporting the others. When ground forces needed support, ships in orbit provided it within minutes. When ships encountered heavy resistance, ground-based weapons reached into space to help. Everything moved together, commanded by officers who thought 3 moves ahead and weren't afraid to adapt when plans fell apart. The Council began to see why humans had survived their violent history. They didn't just fight, they thought about fighting, studied it, refined it into something approaching art. Then came the incident that nearly broke the alliance. A resource-rich world called Moros III held strategic materials the Ravagers needed for their bioships. Intelligence suggested they were about to take it in force. Wu made a decision that shocked everyone. He ordered the planet destroyed. Nuclear weapons struck key locations, triggering a chain reaction in the planet's unstable core. Within hours, Moros III was an uninhabitable wasteland. The Ravagers arrived to find nothing worth taking. Chancellor Oren called for Wu's arrest. Genocide! You destroyed an entire planet's ecosystem. I destroyed a resource, Wu corrected coldly. There was no intelligent life on that world, and what existed we evacuated first. Would you prefer I let the Ravagers take what they needed to build more ships? There must have been another way. There wasn't, Wu interrupted. This is war. Real war. Not the sanitized conflict you imagine. Sometimes winning means making choices that keep you awake at night. But losing means everything dies, so we make those choices anyway. The Council session dissolved into chaos. Some species called for human forces to withdraw. Others argued they couldn't afford to lose human support. Toril found himself defending humans while simultaneously wondering if Oren was right to fear them. Nira watched the debate from the observation gallery and realized something the others were missing. Humans didn't enjoy this. Wu's face when he gave that order. She'd seen that expression before on soldiers who came back from hard fights, guilt, regret, but also acceptance that some burdens had to be carried. They're not monsters, she said to Finn, who sat beside her. They're people who learn to do monstrous things when necessary. There's a difference. Is there? Finn asked, genuinely curious. Watch them after the battles, Nira said. Watch how they mourn their dead, how they struggle with what they've done. Monsters don't feel remorse. Humans are drowning in it. That's what makes them dangerous, but also trustworthy. They know the cost of violence. Meanwhile, on the front lines, something unexpected was happening. Council soldiers who trained alongside humans began adopting their methods. Not the weapons or tactics necessarily, but the mindset. They learned to hold positions through will rather than logic. They started looking after each other the way humans did, forming bonds that transcended species. A Council soldier named Tev saved a human marine during a messy extraction, carrying him 3 kilometers through hostile territory, despite having 2 functioning limbs himself. When asked why, he said something that became famous. Because that's what PAC does. Human special operations teams added a new dimension to the war. They operated in ways that made Council observers deeply uncomfortable, infiltrating behind enemy lines, sabotaging Ravager biofacilities, eliminating command organisms. Council military theory had no framework for this kind of warfare. To them it looked like assassination and terrorism. To humans it was just asymmetric warfare. When you couldn't win through conventional means, you changed the rules. A team led by Lieutenant Sarah Webb spent 3 weeks living in Ravager-controlled territory, gathering intelligence and planting explosives. They survived by moving only at night, eating barely enough to stay alive and hiding in places most species wouldn't even consider. When they finally struck, 12 humans destroyed a breeding complex that would have produced millions of ravagers. Webb's report was 3 pages of tactical analysis, but in the margins someone had written a single sentence that Nira found in the archives. "We live in hell so others don't have to." That, Nira realized, was the core of human military philosophy. They'd turned suffering into a tool, a weapon wielded with precision. They'd taken every terrible thing their world had taught them and used it to protect species who'd never known such hardship. The Council slowly accepted that winning meant accepting human methods, even when those methods horrified them. They began to understand that humans hadn't become warriors despite their history. They'd become warriors because of it, and the Ravagers were about to learn what millennia of warfare had created. Intelligence came from an unlikely source. A damaged Ravager vessel captured during a skirmish near the outer colonies. Human technicians spent weeks studying its organic systems, tracing neural pathways and communication networks. What they found changed everything. Dr. Patricia Chen delivered the briefing herself, her hands shaking slightly as she pulled up the holographic display. "They're not independent," she explained to the assembled commanders. "Every Ravager swarm is connected to a central intelligence hub. Like a brain controlling individual cells. We found the location." The display showed a world deep in what had been Council territory before the invasion. Scans revealed massive biostructures covering the surface, with millions of Ravagers swarming around what could only be described as a living fortress. The Central Intelligence resided there, coordinating every attack across dozens of worlds. "Cut off the head," Commander Stone said quietly. "The body dies." General Wu studied the tactical data with the careful attention of someone who knew this could either end the war or doom them all. The defenses were incredible. Orbital defense organisms that could tear apart capital ships, ground forces numbering in the tens of millions, and response time. Ravager reinforcements could arrive within 72 hours of any attack beginning. "It's impossible," Chancellor Oren said when the plan was presented to the Council. "You'd need every ship we have, and even then the casualties would be unsustainable." "Acceptable casualties," Wu corrected. "And yes, we'll need every ship. Council and human both. This is the fight that ends the war." For once, there was no debate. Every species had lost too much to turn back now. The combined fleet began assembling at a staging point 3 systems away, the largest military force ever gathered in Council space. Nira watched from a Council observation ship as vessels from 17 species formed up alongside human warships. It should have been a beautiful sight, cooperation on a scale never seen before. Instead, it felt like watching a funeral procession. Finn stood beside her, now wearing the insignia of a Council officer who'd trained extensively with human forces. "We're all afraid," he said softly. "Humans too, despite what they show. How can you tell?" "The quiet ones," Finn explained. "Before every major operation, some humans get very quiet. They're thinking about what might happen, who might not come back. That's when you know it's serious." The fleet moved 3 days later, jump drives activated in sequence, tearing holes in space-time to carry them toward their target. They emerged in the target system in perfect formation, and immediately, all hell broke loose. Ravager defense organisms swarmed up from the planet like locusts, organic ships that moved with disturbing grace. The battle began with massive exchanges of fire that lit up the void like a second sun being born. Human ships tanked damage that should have destroyed them, their armor designed to fail in layers while keeping critical systems protected. Council vessels used speed and precision, dancing around enemy fire while delivering their own strikes. Rodriguez led her fighter squadron through the chaos, dodging between capital ship exchanges and organic projectiles that tracked their heat signatures. 2 of her pilots died in the first 10 minutes. She watched their ships disintegrate and kept flying, kept fighting because that's what humans did. Grief could come later. On the ground operation front, things went from bad to worse immediately. The landing zones were supposed to be cleared by orbital bombardment. Instead, Ravagers adapted, burrowing underground and emerging right in the middle of human and Council forces as they landed. Sergeant Grant hit the ground running, his combat drop pod slamming into soil that writhed with organic matter. His squad formed up around him, weapons already firing at targets that seemed to materialize from the ground itself. Around them, Council troops struggled with the sheer chaos of combat against an enemy that didn't follow any rational tactical doctrine. "Push forward," Grant shouted, leading his Marines toward the first objective. They had 72 hours to reach the Central Intelligence and destroy it. After that, Ravager reinforcements would make extraction impossible. The fighting was brutal in ways that made previous battles look gentle. Ravagers came in waves that never stopped, throwing themselves at human and Council positions with absolute disregard for losses. They didn't retreat. They didn't regroup. They just kept coming. Grant's squad took shelter in the ruins of what might have been a building before the Ravagers converted it to organic matter. Bodies piled up around their position, Ravager corpses creating a wall that new attackers had to climb over. A Council soldier named Kell fought beside them, his 3 arms working his weapon with efficiency. Grant had to respect. The kid had learned fast, absorbed human tactics, and made them work with Council physiology. When the weapon overheated, Kell drew a blade and kept fighting just like a human would. The battle for the surface lasted 18 hours. Human artillery hammered positions ahead of the advance. Combat engineers blew holes through Ravager biowalls. Medics worked in the open, treating wounded under fire because waiting meant death. And slowly, meter by meter, the combined force pushed deeper into enemy territory. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Hayes commanded the frigate Defiant in high orbit, providing fire support for ground forces while fighting off Ravager space organisms. His ship had taken damage to 3 major systems and was venting atmosphere from the port side, but Hayes kept her in the fight. "Commander, we need to fall back," his tactical officer said, showing him the structural integrity reports. Hayes looked at the ground forces indicator. Grant's unit and 24 others were pinned down, taking fire from a position Hayes could eliminate with one good bombing run. But making that run meant exposing his damaged ship to fire it might not survive. "Negative," Hayes said. "Plot firing solution on those coordinates. All power to forward batteries. Sir, the shields—" "No, do it anyway." The Defiant dove into lower orbit, weapons blazing. Hayes felt the ship shudder as Ravager fire tore into her hull. Warnings screamed across every display, but his weapons found their target, obliterating the enemy position and giving ground forces the opening they needed. Then a Ravager organism latched onto the Defiant's hull, starting to burrow into the engineering section. Hayes saw the calculations instantly. The ship was lost, but he could still do one last thing. "Evacuate," he ordered, his voice calm despite the chaos. "Everyone to escape pods." "That's an order." "Commander, now!" His crew evacuated. Hayes stayed at the helm, piloting his dying ship toward a massive Ravager biostructure on the surface. His last transmission was simple. "Tell my family the mission comes first." The Defiance reactor went critical on impact, creating an explosion visible from orbit. The biostructure collapsed, opening a path straight to the Central Intelligence Facility. Grant and his combined force pushed through that opening, fighting through corridors of living tissue that tried to close around them. They lost soldiers with every meter, but they didn't stop. Couldn't stop. The Central Intelligence was nothing like they expected. Not a creature, but a massive organism that filled an entire cavern, pulsing with bioluminescence and connected to thousands of neural pathways. It was beautiful and terrible, a mind vast enough to coordinate an invasion across dozens of worlds. "Set charges," Grant ordered. "Everything we've got." They placed explosives throughout the chamber while Ravagers threw themselves at the defensive perimeter in frenzied waves. When the last charge was set, Grant gave the order to fall back, but the exit was already swarming with enemies. "Alternate route," Kell shouted, pointing to a tunnel his sensors showed might lead to the surface. They ran, fighting as they went, dragging wounded and leaving a trail of empty ammunition behind them. The charges detonated as they emerged into daylight, and Grant felt the ground shake as the entire facility collapsed inward. The Ravagers stopped attacking. Across the planet, across the system, across every battlefield in Council space, they simply stopped. Without the Central Intelligence to coordinate them, the swarms became confused, disorganized, easy targets. The war wasn't over. It took another 3 weeks to clear out the remaining Ravagers, but it was won. The cost was staggering. 40,000 human casualties, 20,000 Council losses, ships destroyed, worlds damaged, and heroes who would never come home. But when the last Ravager fell, there was something the galaxy hadn't felt in months. Silence, peace, hope. The memorial stretched for 3 kilometers across the plains of Ilos Prime. Simple markers, each bearing a name and species designation. Human names were mixed with council names, united in death as they had been in battle. Some markers had no names at all, just numbers for those too damaged to identify. Nira walked among them, her recording device forgotten. She'd come to document the aftermath for her research, but found herself simply bearing witness instead. A human soldier sat cross-legged before one marker, speaking softly to someone who could no longer hear. A council officer placed flowers at another. The gesture learned from humans who'd taught him that remembering mattered. The war had ended 3 weeks ago, but nobody felt victorious. They felt hollowed out, changed in ways they were only beginning to understand. Commander Stone found her there as evening approached. The human looked older than she had months before, lines etched deep around her eyes. "You're writing about us," she said. It wasn't a question. "Trying to," Nira admitted. "I thought I understood humans before the war. I was wrong." Stone knelt beside a marker bearing the name Lieutenant Commander Ryan Hayes. She touched it gently, as if greeting an old friend. "Did you know him?" "I read his file. He saved hundreds of lives with his sacrifice. He saved my life once, years before this war," Stone said quietly. "Training accident. He pulled me from a burning cockpit and went back for 2 others. That's who he was, someone who always went back." She paused, emotion flickering across her face. "The hardest part of command is knowing you'll lose people like that and still having to give the orders that put them in danger. How do you live with it?" Stone stood looking out across the memorial field. "We remember them. We honor what they did. And we try to make sure their sacrifice meant something." She turned to Nira. "That's what you don't see in your reports. Yes, humans are good at war. But we hate it. Every soldier who comes home carries pieces of the ones who didn't. We don't celebrate victory. We mourn the cost." Across council space, similar scenes played out. Worlds that had never known war now struggled with concepts humans had lived with for millennia. Post-traumatic stress, survivor's guilt, the weight of having seen friends die. Human counselors worked with council survivors, sharing techniques developed over thousands of years of warfare. They taught breathing exercises, talked about processing trauma, explained that breaking down after horror didn't make you weak. It made you normal. Finn sought out Sergeant Grant 3 weeks after the final battle. He found the human at a firing range, practicing despite having no war left to fight. Grant saw him approach and set down his weapon. "You doing okay?" Grant asked. "I dream about it," Finn admitted. "The sounds, the smell, watching my squad mates die. I thought I was prepared, but nobody's prepared for their first real war," Grant interrupted gently. "Doesn't matter how much you train. The reality is always worse than you imagine. How do you handle it?" Grant was quiet for a long moment. "Honestly, some days better than others. I've lost a lot of friends over the years. You learn to carry it, but it never gets lighter. You just get stronger at bearing the weight. Does it ever stop hurting?" "No," Grant said simply. "And you shouldn't want it to. The pain means you cared about them. Losing that would mean losing part of what makes us worth saving in the first place." The council assembled again, this time not in crisis but in reflection. Ambassador Toril stood before the gathered species and spoke words that would be remembered for generations. "We called humans primitive. We feared their violent nature. We quarantined them because we believed they were too dangerous to join civilized space." He paused, letting the words sink in. "We were wrong. Not about their capacity for violence, that's undeniable. But about what that violence means." He gestured to a display showing images from the war, humans carrying wounded council soldiers, council troops fighting beside human marines, ships from both fleets protecting each other. Humans taught us that violence and compassion aren't opposites. They're tools, and what matters is how you use them. Humans could have conquered us easily. Instead, they bled with us. For us. Chancellor Oren stood, and for once his voice held no accusation. "I was wrong to fear them. Or rather, I was right to fear them, but wrong about what I should fear. Their violence isn't the danger. The danger is what happens when we face threats like the Ravagers without humans beside us." The vote to grant humans full council membership took less than an hour. The margin wasn't narrow anymore. It was overwhelming. But Nira's research had revealed something else, something that troubled and fascinated her in equal measure. She presented her findings to a closed session of the Council's Scientific Advisory Board. Humans are defined by duality, she explained, showing brain scans and behavioral analysis. The same neurological structures that make them capable of terrible violence also enable incredible compassion. They evolved to protect their pack, which means they developed both the ability to kill threats and to sacrifice themselves for loved ones. You can't separate these traits, they're the same thing viewed from different angles. So they're dangerous because they care? A Lumineth scientist asked. They're dangerous because they care so intensely, Nira corrected. A human who loves you will die for you. A human who hates you will chase you to the ends of the galaxy. They don't do anything halfway. That intensity is what makes them incredible allies and terrifying enemies. Her final report, titled The Deathworld Paradox, became required reading across council space. In it, she argued that humanity's darkness and light were inseparable, that trying to have one without the other meant having neither. Humans had mastered violence not by eliminating it but by controlling it, channeling it toward protection rather than destruction. They live with monsters inside them, she wrote, but they've learned to ride those monsters rather than be consumed by them. This is what we feared. This is what saved us. Stone and Grant met one last time before human forces began rotating home. They stood overlooking a rebuilt city, one of dozens that had been damaged during the war. You think they'll really accept us? Grant asked. Or is this just gratitude that'll fade once they feel safe again? Stone considered the question. Some will always fear us. Can't blame them, we are dangerous, but enough of them fought beside us to know we're more than weapons. That has to be enough, and if it's not, then we prove it again, Stone said simply. As many times as it takes. That's what humans do, we don't give up on Pac, even when Pac is a bunch of aliens who thought we were barbarians 6 months ago. Grant laughed, the sound carrying across the evening air. Guess that makes us the galaxy's guard dogs now. Could be worse, Stone replied. Could be nobody wanted us at all. They stood in comfortable silence as the sun set, 2 soldiers carrying the weight of war and the hope of peace in equal measure. Behind them, human and council workers rebuilt together, learning from each other, creating something neither species could have made alone. The war had changed everyone it touched. Council species learned that sometimes survival required violence, that peace had to be defended, that honor could be found in sacrifice. Humans learned that not all civilized beings were soft, that courage came in many forms, that their violent history could be turned toward protection rather than conquest. And in the spaces between species, in the shared trauma and shared triumph, something new began to grow. Not just alliance, but understanding. Not just cooperation, but genuine friendship forged in the fires of war. 6 months after the war ended, the Council convened for the most important vote in its 4,000-year history. The chamber was packed with representatives from every member species, observers from neutral parties, and a delegation of humans who tried to look calm despite knowing their entire future hung in the balance. Commander Stone sat in the human section, flanked by General Wu and Ambassador Toral, who had insisted on standing with the humans despite being a council member. The chamber's architecture was designed to amplify every voice, ensuring even the quietest species could be heard. Right now, Stone wished it weren't quite so effective. Every angry objection echoed like thunder. Chancellor Oren had the floor, and despite his earlier change of heart, he was presenting the opposition's argument with clinical precision. Let me be clear, I am not arguing that humans are evil. I'm arguing that they're unpredictable. Yes, they saved us, but we've seen what they're capable of when threatened. How long before they decide we're the threat? Murmurs of agreement rippled through certain sections. Stone forced herself to remain still, to not react. Humans had learned patience over millions of years of hunting. She could wait through one more debate. A young representative from the Tellan species stood. Chancellor Oren speaks of unpredictability, but I was on Moros 3 when the Ravagers attacked. I watched human soldiers hold a hospital for 16 hours against impossible odds. 4 of them died protecting children they'd never met before. If that's unpredictability, I'll take it over the alternative. The debate raged for hours. Representatives stood and shared stories, some of human violence that frightened them, others of human sacrifice that moved them. Finn, now a decorated council officer, spoke about learning to fight from humans, about discovering strength he didn't know he had because a human sergeant believed in him. Finally, Nira requested the floor. She'd spent the last 6 months analyzing every aspect of human involvement in the war, and her findings would likely determine the vote. "I've studied 17 species across my career," she began, her voice steady despite her nervousness. "None of them prepared me for humans. They are contradictions made flesh, violent yet compassionate, aggressive yet self-sacrificing, dangerous yet trustworthy." She pulled up holographic displays showing her research data. "Many of you fear human violence. You should. But consider this. Humans fear their own violence more than we ever could. They've built entire systems to control it. Laws, ethics, codes of conduct. They teach their children from birth to channel aggression into protection, to use strength in service of the weak. No other species in our database has developed such sophisticated mechanisms for self-restraint." She changed the display to show comparative analysis. Council species evolved on gentle worlds where cooperation was always beneficial. We never needed to develop strong inhibitions against violence because we rarely encountered situations that required it. Humans evolved on a world that tried to kill them daily. They had to become capable of extreme violence to survive, but they also had to control that violence or they'd destroy themselves. Every human carries both capacities, the ability to kill and the discipline not to. That's what makes them unique. "So we should trust them because they can control themselves?" Oren asked skeptically. "We should trust them because they choose to control themselves," Nira corrected. "Every day, every moment. Humans live with temptations toward violence that most species can't comprehend, and they resist those temptations constantly. That's not weakness, it's the strongest demonstration of character I've ever witnessed." The chamber fell silent. Then a representative from the outer colony stood. "My daughter is alive because a human medic ran through enemy fire to reach her. That human died getting her to safety. I never learned his name, but I'll spend the rest of my life grateful that someone from a death world cared enough about a child from a gentle world to give his life for hers." More stories followed. A merchant whose ship was saved by a human patrol. A scientist who worked alongside human engineers rebuilding damaged infrastructure. A teacher whose students were evacuated by human soldiers who sang songs to calm their fear during the escape. When the vote finally came, Stone found herself holding her breath despite years of military discipline. The display showed the count in real time, green indicators for acceptance, red for rejection. The numbers climbed and Stone watched as green pulled ahead then surged forward. The final tally was decisive. Humans would be granted full council membership with all rights and responsibilities that entailed. The chamber erupted in mixed reactions. Cheers from some sections, stunned silence from others. Stone felt Wu's hand on her shoulder, saw Toral's expression of relief and triumph. But there was work to do before celebration could begin. The integration protocols took another 2 months to finalize. Human military advisors began training Council defense forces in earnest, sharing tactics and strategies refined over millennia of warfare. Council scientists collaborated with human researchers, combining technological sophistication with human innovation and adaptability. Trade agreements opened human markets to Council goods and Council markets to human products. Cultural exchange programs sent humans to study on Council worlds and Council citizens to experience Earth's beautiful, terrifying diversity. Sergeant Grant found himself teaching at a Council military academy, showing students from 6 different species how to work together under pressure. His classes were brutal. He didn't soften human training methods for alien sensibilities. But his students learned, adapting human techniques to their own physiologies and cultures. Finn graduated top of his class and requested assignment as a liaison officer working with human units. When Grant asked him why, Finn said simply, "Because I learned more about courage from you than I did from a lifetime in Council space. I want to keep learning." Rodriguez's fighter squadron took on Council pilots for joint training exercises. The first few sessions were disasters. Council pilots couldn't handle the G-forces human maneuvers required. So Rodriguez and her team developed new tactics that played to Council strengths, combining human aggression with Council precision. The resulting mixed squadrons proved more effective than either species alone. Dr. Chen established a research partnership with Lumineth scientists, studying Ravager biology to ensure no remnants could regenerate into a new threat. They found no active organisms but maintained monitoring stations just in case. Chen told her council counterparts. Humans learned the hard way that vigilance never ends. We're happy to share that lesson so you don't have to learn it through tragedy. 8 months after the vote, a deep space monitoring station detected something that sent chills through every species in council space. A signal from beyond known space bearing markers similar to Ravager communications but fundamentally different. Not a swarm intelligence, something organized, deliberate, possibly even more dangerous. The emergency council session convened within hours. Fear hung thick in the chamber as they studied the preliminary data. Then General Wu stood and somehow his presence steadied the room. We don't know what this is yet, he said. Could be nothing. Could be a new threat. Either way, you're not facing it alone anymore. That's what membership means. We stand together, always. Commander Stone added, the council fought the Ravagers alone and nearly died. Then you let humans help and we won. Whatever's out there, we face it as allies. And if it wants a fight? She smiled, sharp and cold. Well, it's about to learn what happens when you threaten a Deathworlders pack. The mood shifted. Fear didn't disappear, but it was tempered now with something stronger. Confidence, unity, the knowledge that they weren't alone anymore. Nira watched from the observation gallery and thought about how much had changed in less than a year. The council had evolved, forced to confront realities they'd avoided for millennia. They'd learned that peace required the capacity for violence, that cooperation meant accepting uncomfortable truths, that survival sometimes demanded sacrifice, and humans had learned too, that their violent nature could be a gift rather than a curse, that other species could be worth protecting, that strength without compassion was just tyranny, but compassion without strength was suicide. A memorial station now orbited Earth, visible from the surface on clear nights. Representatives from every council species had contributed to its construction, and it bore names from 17 different worlds. Human families visited to remember loved ones who died in a war that wasn't theirs. Council citizens came to pay respects to the Deathworlders who saved them. The inscription was simple, carved in every known language. Here stood those who answered the call. From a world that made them strong, they brought hope to worlds that needed strength. Below it, someone had added an unauthorized addition in smaller text. They were dangerous. Thank goodness. The council never removed it. Stone stood on that memorial station a year after the war ended, General Wu beside her. They watched Earth turn below them, beautiful and deadly. A world that created warriors because only warriors could survive it. Think we're ready for whatever's coming? Wu asked. Stone considered the question. Down on Earth, humans went about their lives, loving, fighting, building, destroying, creating, and surviving. In council space, species once isolated now worked together, learning from each other, growing stronger through cooperation. No, she said honestly, but we're more ready than we were, and that's enough to start. A mixed patrol of human and council ships passed overhead, running drills that combined tactics from both civilizations. Fighter craft moved in formations that would have been impossible a year ago. Pilots from different species working in perfect coordination. Wu smiled. Galaxy doesn't know what it's in for. Species that survived by being clever, and species that survived by being stubborn, working together. He paused. Actually, yeah. We might be ready after all. The unknown signal continued broadcasting from beyond charted space, a mystery waiting to be solved, or a threat waiting to be faced. But the galaxy wasn't the same as it had been before the Ravagers. It had humans now. Deathworlders who'd proven they could be trusted with violence because they chose not to use it except when necessary. And perhaps more importantly, humans now had the Council. Species who'd learned that surviving meant more than just not dying, that civilization required the will to defend it, that peace was worth fighting for. Whatever came next, they would face it together, predators and prey, warriors and scholars, violence and wisdom united by shared sacrifice and mutual respect. The galaxy had changed, and it was stronger for it. On Earth, the sun rose over mountains where humans had learned to climb, over oceans where they'd learned to sail, over plains where they'd learned to run until their prey collapsed from exhaustion. A world that had forged them through millions of years of trial and error, survival and adaptation, violence and love. Now those humans looked to the stars not as conquerors but as protectors, because that's what Pact did. They protected each other no matter how many worlds that pack might span. and somewhere in the dark between stars something unknown transmitted its signal. Unaware that the galaxy had gained defenders, who'd learned long ago that the scariest thing about humans wasn't their capacity for violence, it was their refusal to quit.